Throughout the centuries there have been many people who are accused of witchcraft, but most of them were women. It was very easy for men to accuse their partners and other women of this crime, and many were sentenced to death for being witches. Some were forced to go to trial, and were dunked in rivers and drowned, but across England and Scotland there were lots of women being executed on the gallows. But there was one man who was a rather prominent nobleman across England during Elizabeth I's reign, who found himself also accused of witchcraft on board a ship which was captained by Sir Francis Drake. But Thomas Doughty's head was hacked from his shoulders after this accusation, and he remains one of the only men who during the Tudor times was executed for witchcraft. Join us today as we look at this, and as always, to support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. Thomas Doughty was born in 1545, and he was a nobleman, scholar, soldier, but also a personal secretary to Christopher Hatton, a favourite of Elizabeth I, who sat as a judge that condemned Mary Queen of Scots to death, but he became a close friend of Francis Drake. It's said that Doughty and Drake were close during Drake's military involvement in Ireland, and the pair, along with John Winter, left Plymouth in 1577 to travel to Alexandria. The mission was to actually mess with Spanish treasure ships in the New World, and the three had shared responsibility for the mission to begin with, but Drake then took command of the expedition. It's likely that Elizabeth I did not know about this mission, as raiding Spanish ships could have been seen as an act of warfare, but there was friction between Francis Drake and Thomas Doughty after Drake took control. He was clearly the right man to do so, as he was much more experienced, but Doughty was then given command of a captured Portuguese ship known as the Santa Maria, but there were significant problems between Drake and Doughty at this point. Thomas Doughty was even more outraged when he caught Drake's brother Thomas stealing from the captured treasure on board of Doughty's ship, but then Drake took control of this. He renamed it the Mary, and he assigned Doughty to command his own flagship, the Pelican. But as the three set sail, the further tension increased, and Drake then demoted Doughty out of this. He forced him to command a tiny and small vessel, which was called the Swan, and Doughty believed this was a huge insult to his skills. He then became dissenting against Drake, and then began to complain to other sailors about him. However, during the voyage there was a huge storm, which split the Swan up from the fleet, and with this Drake believed that Doughty was abandoning him, or was turning against him. He then also became obsessed with the fact he believed Doughty was practising witchcraft, or was interfering with the dark arts. But on the 17th of May 1578, he linked back up with the fleet, and with this Thomas and Drake had a huge argument. In this, Drake hit Thomas, and then as a commander he ordered Doughty to be tied to the mast of the ship. But he was then placed under house arrest and was held in his quarters aboard the ship, and the sailors were prevented from speaking to him. Drake then levelled the infamous charge of witchcraft against Thomas Doughty, and he said he was a conjurer and a seditious person, and he said his brother was a witch and a poisoner. But Drake's fleet arrived in Puerto San Julian on the 20th of June 1578. Doughty was then placed on trial for witchcraft 10 days later, and he was charged with mutiny also and treason. But Doughty appealed to be taken back to England to be tried, as he believed this would be fairer for him. But Drake would not allow this, and Doughty then asked Drake to state how he'd been able to place someone on trial, and he believed he could not do this, as he had not been given permission from Elizabeth I to do it. Drake did not have the power, and a lawyer friend of Doughty claimed that, "This is not the law, not agreeable to justice," and Drake said, "I have not to do with you crafter lawyers, neither care I for the law, but I know what I will do." But the evidence against Doughty was because he had made a number of seditious claims against Drake during arguments. There were two particular pieces of evidence which were shocking and damning. One was the testimony of Edward Bright, the onboard carpenter, which was denied by Doughty, and it was claimed that Doughty had revealed that he had told William Cecil, the Queen's chief adviser, the true purpose of the plundering mission. This would lead Drake to have got into trouble with the Queen, and Drake himself could have been sentenced to death for treason and considered a warmonger. His actions could have plunged England into war with the Spanish, and this would have angered Drake that Doughty revealed this. But Thomas Doughty was found guilty by the strange court, but Drake did not produce a royal commission granting his death sentence, as Elizabeth I had to sign the death warrant of any of her subjects. Drake said he was a threat to his life, and the men then agreed to back him. Doughty said he should be released once the ships arrived at Peru, but Drake did not like this, and he said he would turn against the English and treasonously turn to the Spanish. but John Winter offered to keep Doughty locked up on his ship, but this was not popular with his crew, and with this Doughty's execution was then confirmed. He asked that he and Drake, the former friends, had communion together, and it was said that, and after this holy repast, they dined also at the same table together, as cheerfully in sobriety, as ever in their lives they had done aforetime, each cheering up the other, and taking their leave by drinking each to other, as if some journey had been had. But on the 2nd of July 1578, Thomas Doughty was beheaded by axe, and his head was then taken from his body. Following this, Drake then changed the name of his ship to the Golden Hind, to honour Christopher Hatton, to gain favour with Hatton, who Doughty was a very close friend of, and to gain favour with Hatton. Some did believe that Doughty had been a spy, who had been tasked to spy on Drake for William Cecil, but the execution of him haunted Drake when he came back to England. His brother John Doughty then tried to gain some legal action against Drake, and there was much belief that false testimony had been gathered just to execute Doughty. But Thomas Doughty was a man who served as a personal secretary to Christopher Hatton, one of Elizabeth I's favourites, and he was definitely a man who would have attended the royal court at times. But his execution in Puerto San Julian was a shocking act in which Francis Drake decided to get rid of him. The pair were close at times, but Doughty was a man who was offended by Drake's experience and command of the voyage, and this jealousy brought him into trouble, but he was a man who was also probably unfairly executed, and was unfairly accused of witchcraft. But today he's remembered as one of the only men to be executed for this specific crime during the Tudor period. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.